In honor of Jewish Book Month, JBS presents the Hampton Synagogue's Author Discussion Series with Rabbi Avraham Bronstein.
Well, this scene takes place in 1958 in a Hebrew school classroom in Queens. The teacher has just told her class about the Israel Independence Day. It will be the 11th birthday of the State of Israel. And the teacher is actually a Holocaust survivor who lived in Israel for a while and got married an American and now is teaching Hebrew school in Queens. And one of the students asks about Hitler and the final solution. And unlike most other people at that time, because it really was not spoken of, the teacher gives a very thorough, honest answer, and this creates a big hubbub, and she is called to the principal's office to discuss what happened. Mrs. Cohn stuck her head into Mr. Levinson's office once all of the students were gone. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes, come back tomorrow at 2:45 before class starts. We have to discuss your classroom management skills." By the time of their meeting the next afternoon, Mr. Levinson had a bigger issue than discipline to discuss with Mrs. Cohen. He had been fielding phone calls and visits from parents for much of the day. "Have a seat, Mrs. Cohen," said Mr. Levinson as he pointed to a chair opposite his desk. He looked stern and displeased. "I wasn't aware, Mrs. Cohn," he said in a sarcastic tone, "that Hitler and his virulent anti-Semitism, which resulted in starvation, torture, and the killing of 6 million of our people, was in our curriculum for our Bet class. The children are 10 years old. In fact, to my knowledge, it's not even taught to our bar mitzvah students. Don't you think it should be? There would have been no state of Israel without the Nazi horror." "That is your opinion, Mrs. Cohn, but in any case, it was not your place to tell these impressionable children about it. They are much too young. Why, some of the parents of our students are victims themselves. Don't you think it's the decision of the parents to tell their child at a time and place of their choosing? And if they choose not to, if they want to try to pick up their lives and never mention it, isn't that their right?" "I am a survivor myself," said the teacher. "You can't live your life fully and honestly by never dealing with it." "Well, I am truly sorry that you suffered. But the fact that you want to talk about it does not make you judge and jury on this issue. You will find it nowhere in our curriculum. It is a very sensitive topic. Our enrollment has been increasing, and we don't want parents to take their children out of Hebrew school en masse because we are usurping their prerogative. They don't like your remarks, and they also don't like the utter lack of discipline and decorum in your classroom, and neither do I. I could not believe what I saw and heard. Cursing and obscene gestures. Is that par for the course?" Mrs. Cohn knew that every teacher in the Hebrew school had a discipline problem. The children were tired after sitting a whole day in public school, and many were bored. At least she tried to make it interesting for them. She actually wanted to say if anyone deserved to be cursed at, it was the Nazi dictator, but she decided not to go there. "No, sir, they became agitated when I mentioned Hitler and the final solution. as indeed most people still do. It's not even been 15 years. It was a traumatic event for our people, and everyone reacts differently, so it's best not to bring it up. Although she had a feisty personality and was stubborn and tough, Deborah Cohn began to cry. She had survived the Shoah, immigrated to Israel, and then learned yet another language and adapted to life in the States. She was not going to let this wretched man push her around. What did he know? When had he ever put his life on the line? What had he done to help? He seemed too old to even have been a World War II veteran. She had what he wanted, and she knew it. It was not easy to find a fluent Hebrew speaker in Northeast Queens, let alone one who was conversant with Jewish history and tradition. She would not let him get away with this tongue lashing, which was assaulting her soul and dredging up her worst memories. I lost my whole family, and you are lecturing me about the proper way to handle such a massive and immeasurable loss? I'm truly sorry, but you can't inflict your losses on your students and their families. I look at it that I am teaching them history, the history of the Jewish people, both the good and the bad. I am a living part of that history. Unlike the 6 million, I was fortunate enough to survive. The students are a link in that history, and they should know it. Mrs. Cohn, you are being insubordinate. If you want to work here, you have to follow the curriculum and the rules. I am going to put you on probation, and it's highly likely that I may not ask you to return next fall.
So I'm going to go out of order a little bit, just based on the excerpt that you read.
Fine.
There's 3 different values, I think, in the conversation that you just gave us between the principal and the Hebrew school teacher. Right? There's the right of parents to raise their children with the family narrative or the family story that they want to be able to inculcate into the children. Right? There's a community's responsibility to know its own past and to know where it's coming from. And there's also maybe a community's decision to hide certain parts of its past either for its own progress. We want to, as a community, look forward and not look backwards. Or we as a community want to protect members of the community who would be traumatized by re-experiencing the truth and by re-experiencing our history. And all 3 of those factors go back and forth in that conversation. I'm wondering, just as you were writing the book, what you thought about the way that those 3 values conflict with each other. Who do you think is right?
Well, again, this did not happen. This whole interaction is totally made up. But one of the things that I wanted to show here was that in 1958, I believe it was just about the time that the Diary of Anne Frank was coming out. Prior to that, there was no mention. The term Holocaust had not even been coined yet, and nobody was really talking about it. Now, I'm sure that in my book, there's another couple, which is kind of a foil to the main characters, and the father in that couple can't stop talking about it. So I think people had different experiences, and some chose to talk about it, and some never said a word about it. But the culture was not really interested in talking about it, either the larger American culture nor the Jewish culture. It wasn't taught in Hebrew schools, it wasn't taught in public schools. It wasn't really discussed very much until the Diary of Anne Frank, and then of course in 1960, Eichmann was captured, and his trial took place in 1961, and it was televised, and I think that engendered a little more interest in the topic.
I'm interested in the title of your book, The Takeaway Men, and I'm going to ask you to just first explain who the takeaway men are, just that little part of the book, And I also am wondering why you chose that phrase or those characters to be the title of this story. Why are the takeaway men so important?
Okay. While I was writing the book, there was no question in my mind that the takeaway men had to be the title of the book, and the publisher actually questioned it, and I stuck to my guns, and then the designer who designed the cover said, "What does this mean, the takeaway men?"
So I'm on the right track, you're saying?
You are definitely on the right track, but I felt very strongly this had to be the topic. So first of all, the first mention of the takeaway men in the book was, I wasn't even aware that I had mentioned it. I looked back and I saw it. And the first mention is a survivor is recounting her experience in a labor camp where they did not want any children to be in there. And some of the people sneaked their children in, and the Nazis said, "Oh, we're going to have a nursery for them and everything," and people felt relieved. And then, of course, a couple of days later, they came with their sirens and trucks, and they picked up the children. And these two little girls were screaming, you know, "The takeaway men are coming and taking us away, Mama." So that was number one. The second mention of the takeaway men was when one of my characters gets arrested by the FBI. She's kind of suspected of being tangentially involved with Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, actually with David Greenglass, the brother of Ethel Rosenberg. And my survivor, Aaron, who is only a few days off the boat, walks outside and sees that these official-looking men in these black cars parked on the street are taking away this neighbor. And he thinks to himself, you know, she's the same age as my wife. And this is what happened in Nazi-occupied Poland. You know, is this happening here? So after he sees this scene, he's a very pious man, but he also makes his own rules. And he goes to the morning minyan, and the rabbi can see that he's very upset and asks what's going on. And he says these men, you know, came and took away my neighbor. So the kids, Mindy, the daughter of Lenore, the person who was taken away, starts screaming, you know, the takeaway men came and took Mommy away. And when the survivor's daughter sees the look on her father's face, she understands that takeaway men are real, and this signifies something greater than just this one incident. It's actually, the takeaway men is actually a metaphor in the book, besides having actual manifestations of it. But why was I so set on the takeaway men? Because I had an experience when I was about 4 years old. My parents used to have their dry cleaning taken and then delivered. And I knew the man who used to come to the door. And one day the doorbell rang, and I ran to the door, and there was a strange-looking man there, and he looked very official. He had on a dark suit and a white shirt and a tie and black horn-rimmed glasses. And I said to him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm the takeaway man. I've come to take you away." And 4-year-olds don't understand sarcasm or subtleties. I believed him, and I ran and started screaming, and my father was in the bathroom shaving, and my mother called up and complained and canceled the service. But I remember the truck. It was a red truck with a person in a plaid kilt, and I was frightened of that truck for a very long time after that. And I remember the terror that I felt when someone said, I'm going to take you away. And it also occurred to me that when I was writing the book, this was about the same time as children were being separated from their parents at the border. So it really, there are examples of it, but it also is a metaphor.
That's actually a great place for you to end, because it leads into my next question a little bit. You're thinking about how what you're writing is impacted a little bit by what was going on in the world that you were thinking of. I'm interested a little bit also in what inspired you to write about this time period or this story as a novel. Right? As Glenn mentioned in the introduction, you've been interested in this time period for a long time. You've done other work related to the Holocaust and its aftermath in the American experience. What motivated you, or what inspired you to take that on as a fictional writing project?
Okay, that's a good question. And as you heard in the introduction, I have been obsessed with this topic since I was in the 6th grade and I read the Diary of Anne Frank. And I remember prior to reading the Diary of Anne Frank, I had heard the word concentration camp, and I asked my mother, what's a concentration camp? And she gave me the Diary of Anne Frank, but that didn't tell you what a concentration camp was, because we didn't know what happened to Anne after the book ended and after she was arrested. So I've been studying it, researching it. I'm a former history teacher, and I've written opinion pieces, I've written essays about the Holocaust. As an administrator and as a teacher, I discussed it. I planned programs. In one of the districts I worked in, we had a program where we had a Holocaust survivor and a survivor of the Rwandan genocide coming in and talking together. But I wanted to raise important questions, and I wanted to throw the questions out there. I didn't want to give the answers. When you write an opinion piece, you're saying what you think about it. I wanted everybody to think about it. So these essential questions, I think, are so important when we talk about the Holocaust, but they're timeless, and they're also very timely today. So the question of what is our responsibility to others? How do we treat people who are different, especially immigrants? What do we do when we see evil in the world? Do we look the other way? Do we join in? Do we speak out? Do we take action? And the other question that is always been of great interest to me is, who is a Jew? And I wanted to raise those questions. I did not want to answer them. I wanted the readers to think about and discuss those questions.
The main characters in the book, or maybe like the thread that runs through the book, are these twins, Branka and Johanna. They've been described in various reviews as incredibly intricate, layered characters. Right? They're very complicated. They're beautifully written and articulated. Maybe you could introduce us to them. Who are they? And as you were writing them, what made them so engaging?
Okay, so I guess the first question I should answer is why did I choose twins? And let me just make a little confession here. My husband is an identical twin, and these are not identical, they're fraternal. But I've gotten a bird's eye view of twinness for many years, and I see that they don't look that much alike now. They look like brothers, but they're incredibly close. They speak to each other several times a day. They have a lot in common, but they're really different human beings with a different character and different values. So one of the things that inspired me to write this is because I've known and been close to many survivors, and I have many descendants of survivors who are friends. And I observed that their reaction is very different to their family and their life experience. So some of them embrace their parents' legacy, and some want to run as far away from it as they possibly can. And they're all shades in between. And when I showed the book to several of my second generation friends have read it, but when I showed it to the first one, I was very nervous. And she said, you got it right, because you didn't paint everybody with one brush stroke. We're all very different. So they carry that intergenerational trauma with them, but how they react is very different. So Branka is ultra sensitive. I mean, she is just responds to everything. She wants to heal her father. She wants to heal other people in this story. She takes everything literally. She's constantly asking questions, and she is much more tolerant of her father than her twin sister. Her twin sister, Johanna, or Jojo, as she calls herself when she gets to America. She wants to be a typical American girl. She wants to grow up and be a singer or a movie star. She wants to be popular. She's embarrassed by her father's accent. And I just wanted to show that even though they shared a womb, they shared parents, they shared the same environment, they're still two distinct human beings.
As you were writing the story, and as the plot was developing, and there's a few very interesting twists and turns that we're not going to spoil because we want people to read the book, was there anything that surprised you? Or as you started writing it, did you really have the whole thing kind of planned out?
I did not have the whole thing planned out. I wrote outlines and I discarded them. I wrote chapters and I trashed them. Finally, I got into flow, and I think that the characters, for the most part, started leading me and telling me what to do. But the one thing that surprised me, again, my husband was my muse, and after I would write a chapter, I would share it with him, and he told me that I needed to have a former Nazi in the book. And I didn't really want to have a former Nazi in the book because at that time, nobody was looking at former Nazis. In fact, in the 1950s, the whole thrust of the country and the government was to track down communists. You had the McCarthy hearings, you had the Red Scare, you had the Rosenberg trial. Nobody was thinking about former Nazis, and in fact, the U.S. government after the war encouraged and sponsored 1,000 former Nazis to come to the United States, and they worked in Los Alamos, developing nuclear energy, and also in the space program. So nobody was concerned with former Nazis, so I wasn't sure about that. But he was very insistent, and needless to say, there were former Nazis. They were hiding in plain sight, but no one cared about them. So this really just took on a life of its own, and I don't want to give away too much of the story, but I have the former Nazi working in a kosher deli, and he delivers platters for the twins' birthday party. And the friend, the other survivor who's there, recognizes him, and nothing is really done at the time, but it later leads to a confrontation in the kosher deli with the former Nazi, and this really surprised me, but I was happy with it.
And finally, a last question for me, and then we'll turn to the audience. The book came out only a few weeks ago under very, very different circumstances probably than you imagined your first novel being published under. I'm just wondering what the experience has been for you, publishing your first novel, during a pandemic, this being your first live event, having this book being received by people for the first time, your fictional work being read. What's the whole experience as far as being a published novelist now been for you, especially given everything going on in the world?
Yeah. Well, at first, and I have to say all authors, every author I knew who was coming out during the pandemic really panicked and was not happy about it at all. And actually, this is my live event. Most of the other events I'm having will be virtual or on Zoom. It was very disappointing at the beginning, but then there have been an incredible amount. There's been great support, great interest. It caused me to think about, what is important in my life. Okay, so you're safe and well, so you won't go all over the country speaking. And I challenged myself to meet with 100 groups, book clubs and others virtually, and I've gotten an amazing response, and I'm filling in my calendar, and I am going to be Zooming like crazy. And I have to say that it's been a really great reaction to the first few weeks of the book, and I'm very pleased, and we all need to count our blessings and just do the best we can with what we have.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Meryl Ain.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.